Paula Stern. I chaired the U.S. International Trade Commission, was there for 10 years, and made sure that we put transportation questions into every investigation so as to pinpoint what were the sources of competitiveness or not with imports for American industries and agriculture. My question is based on the fact that we do not have our manufacturers giving them an option of shipping to customers within the United States using our ports, using our maritime system, using our rivers and the oceans that surround us. Of course, the question is the Jones Act, which dates from early 1900s. It's always been a hot button, but I think I'd like to hear what the supply chain experts and maritime experts are thinking going forward as we try to rebuild our manufacturing capabilities here at home and to supply our agricultural folks with the fertilizer and everything else, where imports can go port to port and port and drop their goods for American consumers, but our American manufacturers cannot. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, and it's also very literally close to home coming from where I come from. Let me start by stating that our commitment to the Jones Act is based, among other things, on our awareness that there's a relationship between our national security, our economic security, and our maritime capacity. And whether we're looking at the size of our merchant marine or the size of our U.S. flagged fleet, it is smaller than any country I think would want it to be. And we know that that would be that much more so were it not for the provisions of the Jones Act. But what you raise is also really important, which is the overlooked nature of maritime shipping, not just in the context of the big container ship making its way from China or Vietnam to one of those West Coast ports that everybody was looking at on TV a couple of years ago, but the export side. And riverine travel. I'll tell you, one of the most rewarding visits I did to a grant, again, something that is less than 1% of the scale of the Hudson Tunnel or the Gateway Project, but meant everything to the community that I visited, is in Tell City, Indiana. This is in southern Indiana, across the Ohio River from Kentucky. It's a one-crane operation, and that crane was floating, which meant when the river was too high or was too low, couldn't operate at capacity. And part of why it mattered so much is that the pig iron that comes on the barge traffic that goes on the Ohio River is what feeds the foundry up the hill that accounts for 1,000 jobs outside of Tell City, which has 7,000 people total. Incredibly important for them. And for about $1.5 million, we were able to fund, out of the very same program we're using to build a couple of miles of new on-dock rail in Long Beach so they can get those containers moving, we were able to build them a permanent facility where the crane is no longer floating. Transformative in terms of what they can do in this community. I met with the Port Authority, and the Port Authority of Perry County, Indiana, does not look exactly like the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. These are volunteers who conduct their business, perhaps over coffee at Julie's Diner, but do everything that they can to maintain that piece of infrastructure. All of which is to say that our riverine traffic and our ability to integrate intermodally, what we were doing with trucks, what we were doing with trains, and what we were doing with the maritime piece, is something we need to reinforce, do better at, and do more of. And a big part of how we can do that now is through the investments we're making in physical infrastructure. The other thing that I would emphasize that I also think was encoded in your question and is so important is that exports got overlooked during these supply chain crises, at least I think in the public conversation. Some of the best things we were able to do were support partnering with the USDA and Secretary Vilsack, things like a pop-up container or a pop-up yard outside of Oakland that helped to make sure the backlog didn't prevent goods from moving. And measures like that, creative short-term measures because of circumstances that are forced on us, but more importantly, good long-term measures in terms of our physical infrastructure and our policy are going to be needed so that we're really getting the most out of our already overtaxed goods movement systems. And there's no getting that right. I would add also from a climate perspective, without making more and better use of the floating side of those supply chains.